Hello and welcome. I am Scrapperlock, and this is City of Heroes on the Rebirth server. We are with our brute Quintessence Lass, who's level 43, has just under 2 million XP to go to get to level 44 in our next superpower, and 30 million, a little over that, influence. We're on the story arc to take out the Cray and Countess Cray. We're on the run right now, and we're trying to find the Cray comp code, and we have one more computer to look into. And then I'm not sure what comes next. Don't remember. Um, And we're working at +3 because it's been going pretty well. +3 guys are generally no problem. +4 a little hard to hit, but otherwise we're fine. The main issue we're going to have when the time comes to fight an arch villain, or rather an elite boss, we're going to need to lower it below +3 because it's really hard to beat +4, especially elite bosses. So if they're +1 to the mission, very, very difficult to do. So as we go, since the Cray aren't that difficult to fight at this level, even at +3 and +4, I'd like to continue our discussions of role-playing game theory and practice, I guess, if you want to call it that. We talked about cheating from the DM's perspective, sort of when is it kind of cheating, when is it running, like increasing the narrative. We also talked about players and player characters, and we talked about like it's sort of player agency versus things like psychological limitations in champions or alignment in Dungeons and Dragons. And this is, by the way, a +4 lieutenant. You can see how much longer it takes to take him out, mostly just because of the misses. Today, what I'd like to do is still continue talking, I guess, from the GM's perspective, although, unavoidably we're going to be talking about players as well. We're going to talk about the angry game master. So this comes from a podcast that I was listening to a few weeks ago, and they talked about, I guess somebody had made a post to Twitter. It basically said, if you don't like my rulings as a GM, there's the door. I do all this work, and I create all this stuff for you to enjoy as a player. And if you're gonna, just give me a bunch of crap over it, you can go find another GM and leave the group. And so the people on this podcast were talking about, to some degree, they talked about, well, the person is obviously very upset who wrote this because they used a lot of expletives in their diatribe on Twitter. But they said, so the person is expressing some sort of real frustration as a GM, and obviously you can't just ignore that, right? If the game master is angry and frustrated at the way the players are interacting with him or interacting with his or her world, then it's going to lead to trouble if you just don't say anything, and that's certainly true. And so I guess what I want to talk about is kind of telling somebody to leave your game. When is it being petulant? And when is it reflective of a sad reality that this player just doesn't fit in with the game the GM is trying to run, and maybe the rest of the players are trying to play, and should look for another game master. And so I wanted to sort of talk about that a little bit and where I stand on kind of game masters telling players to leave. There's the door. Obviously, if somebody's causing a lot of friction in the group, then it may be necessary for the game master, for the good of the group, to tell that player that they're not welcome anymore. If someone is obviously doing something unfriendly or hurtful to the players, to one or more of the other players, then you have to stop that from happening. As I've told before, we had, this one friend who literally was a cheater, and he would have his character, not spend the amount of endurance he was supposed to spend, and various other forms of cheating. If you attacked his character, he would throw his character sheet away and say, "Fine, let him die. See if I care." I mean, he was kind of a drama queen or king or whatever you want to call it, and very sort of selfish and self-centered and all of this. And we never officially kicked him out of the group because we were friends with him outside of Champions. He was perfectly fine. and you go to the movies with him and ride around the neighborhood on our bikes and play other games, and he was totally awesome. But get him behind the wheel of a Champions character, and he was a nightmare. And because we were friends with him in all other ways, it was nearly impossible to just not play Champions with him. And we just got kind of lucky that we went to one high school and he went to a different high school, and it just became very hard for us to hang out with each other. And then a couple of us started getting like after school jobs as we got older, so we could only play on weekends. And we just sort of drifted apart and stopped inviting him to come on weekends. And he stopped calling us, and we stopped calling him, and that was kind of the end of it. And nobody like got together and said, let's not call this guy. It just sort of happened organically, and the problem sort of took care of itself. But that took a while. I mean, I want to say like a year of time between when we started to clock that this guy was essentially cheating in Champions, and some of us got angry at that or frustrated, and when he finally left the group. And in between times, there were a lot of struggles. Um, it wasn't easy to be really friendly with somebody outside of Champions, but then be frustrated by the way they were playing the game. And since there wasn't a single game master, there really wasn't one person who could take responsibility and say, you need to leave the group. But if there had been a GM, if I'd been the GM, it may have fallen to me, say, to tell this person, you can't play with us anymore. And, it's almost impossible to say that and remain friends with them outside of the game. They're going to be insulted. They're going to be angry that you booted them out. They're going to take it personally. In a way, it is personal, right? Because it is their personal behaviors that are causing them to be kicked out of the group, right? Now, it's not personal in the sense that it's just about the way they play the game. It's not personal outside of Champions or Call of Cthulhu or whatever the game is. But still, you're making a declaration that you don't want to play with this person. And my experience is that it is nearly impossible to pull that off without also it costing you the friendship. It's very hard. It's very difficult. There are actually people who I've seen on the internet recommend not playing D&D with your friends for this reason. That if you play D&D with your friends and you become incompatible playing D&D or Champions or whatever the role-playing game is, you could lose the friendship if you guys don't play D&D the same way, and you have to ask somebody, or they have to ask you to leave the group. It would be very difficult and hard to stay friends. I think that if it happened to me, that is, if I were told by some DM that they didn't think I fit the group anymore, or maybe I never did and it wasn't working, and no offense, but we're going to have to no longer invite you to our sessions, I think I could deal with it. Because I've thought long and hard enough about games and role-playing games, and I've made all these videos thinking and talking about it and written about it on the internet, and I run my own mush and stuff like this. I've been in a situation where I've had to think about what makes games and game groups work and what doesn't, enough that I think, although I'm sure it would bother me, it's hard to imagine it not bothering you at all, to learn that I wasn't compatible with a group. I don't think I would be unable to remain friends with a person. I think I'd be able to say, okay, I understand. Yes, we can still go to the movies tomorrow, right? But not everyone is going to do that, and I would say probably hardly anyone is going to do that, because most people are only focused on their game right now, right? They're not thinking about larger aspects of game design and theory and so forth. And if you're just focused on this game right now, and that you want to play it, and you may be having fun and not realizing that you're wrecking other people's fun or ruining the GM's life or whatever. And I guarantee you, this friend of ours who was cheating with his endurance and his powers and stuff, he didn't think, and I don't think he thought anything of it. right? He just didn't like it when anything negative happened to his character, and he was just trying to play the game in a way that he enjoyed. And I'm sure he didn't think that that way of playing was ruining the enjoyment for us. And I don't think he ever meant to ruin it for us. He just had his way of playing that just didn't work for the rest of my group. So you may even be doing things that the other players don't like, and you don't even know it. My really good friend who played Seth, the halfling thief who stole from the entire party, he was basically playing Tasselhoff, the Kendar or whatever they're called from Dragonlance, who was a kleptomaniac, I guess. And in the books, all of the characters adored. I guess in the books, all the characters adored Tasselhoff, and they put up with his nonsense because they liked him. And I guess he figured that we would do the same. And I don't know if he thought we, as players, will put up with Seth's nonsense because we like the player of Seth, or whether we would just cooperate with him and make our characters like Seth the thief too much to do anything to punish him. But instead, we, the players, utterly despised this character. Our characters didn't necessarily despise him because he wasn't. He was he was role played as a reasonably likable character. But the players, as players, we hated it. We hated this whole mechanism. We didn't like the stealing. And we all, it turned out, after we talked about it later with each other, we all thought it was sort of selfish that he just decided he wanted to role play this character from a series of books that only one of us had read, the other two hadn't. And he expected all of us to role play in a way that made his character viable. And that's like really selfish. You can't expect other people to role play the way that you want them to. And so the rest of us would have said, "You're wrecking our fun." He would have said, "I don't understand. How is it wrecking your fun for me to do that?" Well, your character is stealing items from mine. Yeah, but he'll give them back. He's not going to keep them. Meanwhile, my assassin almost died because the healing potion that he was supposed to have, wasn't on his belt because Seth had taken it. So, well, he didn't die, right? My friend would have said he almost died, but he didn't die, and he got healed by the cleric, and everything's fine. What are you getting so mad about? Why are you so unhappy? Right? It's just a little fun, and he would have meant it. He didn't. He saw this as just a fun character that we could roleplay about, and he didn't. He didn't. It didn't occur to him that the rest of us were going to just hate this. So he didn't know he was making us miserable, and he didn't set out to do it. Right? He just was. He just was only looking at it from his own perspective, and didn't understand why our perspective would be different. And this happens a lot. And so it's often the case that when you're telling somebody they can't come to the table anymore or to the Zoom anymore because they're doing things that ruin the game for others, they may very well be utterly shocked to hear this because they're not purposely doing anything to ruin the game for others, and they don't even realize that what they're doing might be objectionable. And I guarantee you that my friend who was playing the halfling didn't realize it, and I know for sure the guy playing the characters where he kept saying, "Oh, fine, let him die, see if I care." He didn't. He had no idea how annoying that was and how unpleasant he was making the game for us. And it's down to our childishness because we were still like in junior high and high school, early high school at the time. Nobody really told him, "Look, buddy, you're ruining the game for us with all this nonsense. You've got to stop it." I don't know how successfully any of that would have gone over. That particular player was, although he was a good friend, he definitely had some very sensitive feelings and could easily be offended. And I don't think he was the sort of person you could sit down and say, "Look, this nonsense that you're doing is bothering everybody, and we don't want to play with someone who's not keeping an accurate record of their endurance." Now the mission's complete, but we do have a boss up here, so we're going to go ahead and beat up the boss. Well, if I can not get stuck, we're going to go up and beat up the boss. So we're going to do the same old typical. Let's leave the minion alone because I can beat him up when this guy goes into his invulnerable phase. So yeah, so it's very unpleasant to have to tell people that they can't play in your group. Now, um, we started out actually talking about angry GMs, and and a GM who's basically saying, if you don't like what I'm doing, leave the group. Now that's not the same thing as someone who has been bothering the other players, right? The other players may not particularly care whether we follow the GM's ruling or not, and so it may not bother the other players if you have a player who's not doing what the GM wants. Um, and so the question then becomes, all right, at what point, sort of, where do you draw the line on a player who is upsetting the GM enough that the GM says you need to leave the group, and or the GM having to sort of, so shall we say, take it on the chin because GMs are expected to sacrifice to some degree their own preferences and such to the group when running a game. I mean, you can't be entirely, you can't be a martyr, but there is a certain sense in which a GM is trying to. Um, their first goal is making sure everybody else has fun, and then they worry about whether they're having fun generally. And so, if somebody is, kind of aggravating just the GM and not upsetting the other players, a lot of folks would say, well, the GM just needs to eat that, right? Now, I would say there are limits. And if somebody's really badly upsetting the game master, and now we're taking the code to Justine Kelly and Independence Port, if somebody's really badly upsetting the game master or doing things that are making the game not be fun for the game master, then I would say that either that has to stop or you can expect the game to end, right? Because the game master is going to say, again, Matt Colville's quote, no D&D is better than bad D&D. If I'm miserable every time we get together to play, the easiest way for me to not be miserable is to not play. If that's the case, that's going to be the end of your game. So you have to be careful about that, and the GM shouldn't be so self-sacrificing that they find that they don't want to play the game anymore. And if that happens, your game is done. On the other hand, GMs should be thick-skinned, right? You shouldn't get mad at every little thing, and you should be flexible enough to try and compromise with the players and not always say, look, if you don't like the way I'm doing things, go away. Right? That's always the last resort. Let's talk to Justine and we'll continue talking about this. Thanks for the code. Let me get it. Let me do my thing and now talk to Janet Kellum again. Okay. And she says, now that we have the full source code of the Craycomp operating system, we should be able to figure out if the program is really a threat. Now get out of sight until we can figure this out. All right, so Justine just finished. She'd like you to drop by. Well, coincidentally, we're standing right here. And she says, check at Quintessence last. The code you found proves that Craycomp is more than your everyday operating system. It's actually a sophisticated mind control program. Get it? Cray uses subliminal messages, stuff no one would notice. The code encourages people to do a number of things, buy Cray products, vote for tax breaks for big business, and, above all, respect and adore Countess Cray. This is bad, Quintessence last. 3/4 of the businesses in town already ordered this operating system. You need to get over to the Cray warehouse and destroy the disks. Okay, now we're doing destruction of property. This is an interesting story arc. I mean, we're destroying, essentially, mind weapons, right? We're destroying, essentially, psychological warfare weapons. But it's still technically private property that we're going to be destroying. I guess she's given us the equivalent of a warrant, since she is a contact. So yeah, there is an extent to which game masters need to kind of suck it up and let the players enjoy themselves and not tell players who like aren't having fun your way to get out of the game. Obviously, you don't want to do that, but but there, but it also is also the case that the game master has a right to run a game that will be fun for the game master. And as I say, if it isn't fun, if the game master is dreading the sessions and not looking forward to them, look at the size of this map. Wow. You're going to rapidly have no more campaign, because as soon as the game master realizes they'd have more fun not GMing for you than GMing for you, you're done. So I think the game master has a right to set a certain number of standards about the campaign. The game master has a right at the beginning of the game to say this is what it's going to be like. You can ask the players what they want to do. I did that. But you can also say, look, this is what I'm doing. I'm running in the Forgotten Realms. We're going to be a good aligned party, nobody evil. You either need to be lawful or good, or both, right? You can be lawful neutral, or lawful good, or neutral good, or maybe chaotic good. But your character either has to be lawful neutral or something good. And I'm not going to accept any other characters. And you have a right to do that as a GM. And if the players say, look, we want to play in an evil campaign, you have a right to say, well, find another GM. And so one of the... this is weird. So some of these you have to click on and some you have to beat up. I mean, one of the things that I've taken to doing with just one of my players, when he expresses that he's not happy with certain things that are kind of the way I've decided to set up my world. Like, for instance, I'm sure he's going to dislike it when he discovers that there are no tattoos in my world, because I don't like the way magic tattoos are implemented in Dungeons & Dragons, in Tasha's Cauldron, everything. I mostly hate Tasha's Cauldron, everything. So I have accepted most of the material in there, but there will be no tattoos. And if this friend of mine says, but I want tattoos, and you should have tattoos in your world because they're cool, my answer to him will be, you're welcome to put tattoos in your world when you GM. And I'll just ignore them and not get one for my character because I don't like them. But the other players can if they want. When the next source book comes out, whenever that is, next year or something, with all these, taking all these Unearthed Arcana and putting them into the game, I'm going to say no new rules. We've added, a couple of optional books worth of rules since we started to play. That's it. I'm not adding any new rules to our game. If my friend says you should play with these rules, I will again say to him, you're welcome to play with these rules when you're the GM, right? The game master does have the right to say, I want to play with a certain set of rules, and I don't want to play with this other set of rules, right? I don't want to adjudicate these tattoos because I don't like the way they're implemented. I think they're implemented badly. And no, I thought for a while about homebrewing them, and I said, you know what, I'm not going to waste hours of my time trying to figure out a homebrew balanced way to get magical tattoos that don't suck into my game. I'm just not allowing them. And again, as a GM, you have the right to say that, and you do have the right to not. I wouldn't say to a player either accept that there are no tattoos or get the heck out of my game. Rather, what I say is you're welcome to GM. I'll be happy to put my campaign on hiatus, and you can run things. Right? Usually, this makes the player back off because the player doesn't want to GM. But I think it's a much better solution to offer the GMing opportunity to another person rather than to actually kick them out. Right? Kicking them out is, I don't want to play with you. Offering them to GM is just, look, if you want to do all the work to implement this thing that I don't want to deal with, feel free, and I'll be happy to keep playing with you as the player. Right? So when I say it to my friend, I'm not saying get out of our group if you don't like it. What I'm saying is, well, if you want to run it another way, you're welcome to GM. And I think that that's a better solution. It certainly doesn't sound as angry. It's not threatening to kick somebody totally out of the game experience with your friends, right? And heck, if they say, okay, I'll GM, saves you a bunch of work. Makes my life easier. All right, then all I've got to do is show up. My guess is that most players don't say yes to this. Um, and I know from my experience that once or twice a player has said yes, they've regretted it, and after a little while asked me to come back. So, so yeah, I would say that you have a right to set the game up the way you want. We're playing in the Roman Empire. If somebody says, look, I don't want to play in the Roman Empire anymore, I have the right to say, well, look, I don't want to GM in the Forgotten Realms. If you want to play in the Forgotten Realms, you need to get another person to GM. And again, I think that that's perfectly valid. A game master has the right to be happy, but if what you're doing is making the other one or more of the other players unhappy, then you should don't just say keep making them unhappy. You should say, then you can GM and I'll just play. I'm happy to do that. I'm not mad. Actually, I'd prefer it. Less work for me, right? So we're gonna see what happens at this point right now. They're 7th level. The 7th level adventure is the Shrine of the Kuatoa, and it's pretty much. So far. I don't have any other plans for using published adventures. I happen to. I actually planned this one out before I did the Shrine of the Kuatoa. What I planned out was that since it was a coastal city in an island, that some aquatic creatures. I was actually going to use the Sahug in it first before I came up with the Kuatoa, and I I knew that they were going to steal the votive offerings, and that the party's quest was going to be to get the votive offerings back. And so I knew that, and I didn't really know like who was going to steal them, other than maybe some sort of aquatic group, and we'd have a little bit of underwater adventure because they haven't really done that yet, and I thought it might be fun. And then as I was thinking about like what creatures, right, and looking up in the D&D Beyond search engine and stuff for things that live underwater, Kuatoa was one of the ones that came up, and meant to do that first, okay. And then I remembered the Shrine of the Kuatoa, and I Googled it, and I was, oh, this is D2, and I was like, well, maybe I can use some of the ideas in here. I got the idea that, okay, maybe these guys are bringing the votive offerings to their own like underwater shrine. I thought they were underwater. I didn't know they were in a cave, right? And then I bought Module D2 and read it and thought, actually, this is pretty cool. I'll use some of it. And then the more and more I read it and started adding elements into my own map and stuff, I started to realize really how good this module was, and how the module is basically this one giant puzzle that the players have to solve, and if they don't solve it, they're going to get killed because there are too many Kuatoa to just walk in and start punching, right? And so it wasn't really my intention to use that, so I may use another one that I don't have an intention to use. We'll see. Another reason I chose it is because I'm fairly confident that my best friend has never played in it, whereas there are other ones that I know he has played in, like the Against the Giants. He and I played together a Neverwinter Nights adaptation of those 3 modules, G1, 2, and 3. But I don't think there was, I'm pretty sure there wasn't a D adaptation. So anyway, the level 7 is Shrine of the Kuatoa. Level 8 is they go to Rome, and they presumably get the next clue. And then if they want, there are side quests. Ooh, screen went black for a sec there. If they want, there are side quests, which will be things like, well, there are 3 quests for magic item purchase. So there's a store with a bunch of magic items actually added more than the original. I actually added more than the original 3 for sale, 3 for trade, and 3 for quest. I now have a bunch more for sale for very high prices in some cases. Like, I think Staff of Healing for like 13,000 gold. They don't have 13,000 gold. But I felt like, you know, when they finish their level 8 and maybe level 9 adventures, and they have um, enough treasure amongst the whole party that they could buy this thing. If they decide at that point that they'd like to pool their party treasure and buy it, I really don't have any problem with that, since it'll be kind of the only magic item that they can buy if they do that. Um, and so same thing with the Ring of Sorcery, which is always going to be also going to be very expensive. I did get one disappointment. I found out, I think I mentioned this, that the Eldritch Knight doesn't actually use a shield. I thought she did. I wasn't paying that much attention to her character sheet, but she said she doesn't use a shield because she keeps the hand free to do spells. And so I thought, well, I had made up, as I mentioned, this really cool magic shield that I guess she's probably not going to want, so I'm going to take that out. I mean, the cleric technically could use a magic shield, but since he's not generally going to be attacked with a bunch of physical attacks the way she is, because he flies and he's not a meleeer the way she is, I suspect that it won't be as useful for him to have, and so I'm probably just going to take that one out. And because I don't think they're going to want to do the quest for it, I'll put something else in there. But I have 3 quests that they can go on to find to get magic items without having to pay for them, and those 3 quests will also give them enough treasure if they want to go on them to buy a couple more magic items. And they can also go into the games in the Colosseum. So if they want to do any of those things, they can. So there are potentially, like, shall we say, 4 or 5 what you could call in an MMO or something, or a computer game, side quests. And I don't know if they're going to go on any of them or all of them. I have simply no idea. And I really don't know. I've got one more side quest to work on. I just finished the second of the 3 for getting the magic items. I really don't know where they're going to go after that. And so I had the feeling that I'm not going to know where they're going to go after that for quite some time, and maybe not until they're done. And that's going to make it very hard for me to prep for the next session. And so what I'm kind of intending to do at this point, and this will show you how it's related to what I've been talking about, what I'm kind of intending to do at that point is say, okay, we're 8th level, we finished Rome, you've got 4 of these 16 clues, and at this point I need to take a little bit of a break. And my guess is that probably will be sometime in the middle, like in the summer, like I want to say maybe mid to late July. If so, that'd be good timing, because it's right when the semester is getting ready to ramp up, and I'll need some time to do that. And so I'll just probably tell them, look, I need a break for a few weeks, and that'll give me time to work on stuff, and also time to not have to work on stuff because we're taking a break. And so how does this relate? Talking about other people GMing, I'm going to say, if anybody wants to take over and GM either D&D or some other game for like a short adventure or something, I'm game. Otherwise, we can just not meet for a month or 2 until, I get caught back up to what you guys want to do. So, we'll see what happens. I'm not sure that anybody wants to GM. I suspect no one does. The one person who I think could have done it if he had been able to stick with us is the one guy that hasn't been coming at all. He's the one who originally offered to be a GM, and I think if he had the time, he'd say, sure, I'll spell you for a while and we can run a couple of one-shots or something. But he's probably not going to be around, so yeah, I don't know if anybody's going to do it. It'll be interesting to see. By the way, I don't know if you've noticed, but there have been several times, most of the time we're fine, and then there have been several times when our hit points have really dropped, and I've hit both heals and maybe even use an inspiration. Those are almost always +4s, right? When I'm fighting multiple +4s, including a +4 lieutenant, that's where they start hitting me enough that those hit points really drop. The +3s don't really generally do it to me, but the plus fours do. So anyway, getting back to the subject of the angry DM and or angry GM and sort of how you deal with incompatibility between the GM and the players. I think if it's a moderate level of incompatibility with a single player, as a GM, do the best you can to just take it on the chin and try to keep everybody happy and playing with everybody. If it turns out that it is a major problem with a player, then you may have to either ask that person to leave, or depending on what the problem is, potentially ask that person if they would like to GM instead. I feel like the do you want to GM, I don't know, should we say threat? I feel like that's more appropriate for someone who's backseat GMing, trying to tell you how to run things. My best friend's doing this a little bit, as I've mentioned before, and so he's sort of mildly backseat GMing, and so that's why I'll say to him, "Do you want to GM?" Because you're welcome to it. Like if you're going to tell me how to run the game, then you can run the game, right? And I think in a case like that, asking the person if they would like to GM is very well indicated. On the other hand, if somebody's being a real pain in the neck and driving the other players crazy, you probably shouldn't suggest that they be GM. By the way, not that we tried to solve the problem of our cheater player doing this, but he also GM'd occasionally, and he was the absolute worst GM we ever had because he cheated as GM too. He made up completely unfair villains, where he tried to make unfair, super powerful, unbeatable villains, and he was such a bad character designer that he set up a battle we were supposed to lose, and we beat the villain. So his uber villain was a joke. It was really kind of funny. And then he got mad because we didn't consider his uber villain powerful, and we thought of him as a bit of a pushover. He then stepped in and used GM fiat to beat us after the guy had clearly been defeated mechanically on the battlefield. He also almost always, when he played, he ran his characters as NPCs, and his characters were always the ones who saved the day or had the one power that worked against the bad guy, right? So basically, we were watching him essentially solo the game, which was not at all fun. 4 crates still left to destroy. I feel like I might have missed a couple. Oh, you know what? We didn't go upstairs in that one spot. So yeah, he was as miserably bad as a game master as he was as a player. Nobody liked playing in his adventures because they were all about him. And so yeah, I mean, this is basically somebody who's he was immature. He was a year younger than we were, but no, he wasn't that young. This is like we're in 9th grade. He's in 8th, right? But he was extremely selfish and self-centered, and so wow, and I missed this one too. And so yeah, a selfish GM generally doesn't work very well. So yeah, incompatibility between GM and one or more players can be very difficult. It's about as difficult as incompatibility among the players. These are all social issues that are out of game issues that spill over into the game essentially, and they're sort of out of character issues anyway. And they can be notoriously difficult to solve. But I would say, if you're not happy with the way a player is behaving, it is certainly not a solution to go onto Twitter and complain about it on Twitter or something. What? Where is it? It's not in there. Are you telling me after all this? Oh, okay. I thought it was in the wall. And we're going to have to, like, auto-complete the mission, but we got it. Alright, mission complete. Let's head out. She says, good work, Quintessence Lass. It'll take Cray a while to replace those discs you destroyed. That means they'll have to delay the Cray comp release. It'll buy us a little time, but we still need to figure out how to shut that program down for good. Otherwise, Cray's evil mind controllers will have a window into every Paragon household. Well, we need to fix that, but we're not going to do that today. Look where we are, in the middle of Cray's folly. Fortunately, unlike the old days where we'd have to super jump back, we could just go to Ouroboros. I guess I can sell a bunch of these things. Alright, folks, we're going to stop there. Until next time, I am Scrapperlock, and this has been City of Heroes on the Rebirth server.